Hey, this is Jeff Ratcliffe here. Let's talk about the value in daily fantasy for a minute. The big prizes, yeah, they're attractive, but you have to finish in the top 2% out of thousands of experts to win any real money. So even on your best day, you still feel like you're losing. Now you can play something better. Stat Hero. Stat Hero is a house-based game that combines the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools. Each Stat Hero contest lasts multiple days, but requires only one entry fee, so your money lasts longer. Yes, you can play multiple days with only one entry fee. Stat Hero gives you smaller contests and more chances to win, and no more competing with sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. Survive the game and download Stat Hero today and see how the face of daily fantasy has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us. Stat Hero now open for NFL and NBA. For more information, please visit stathero.com.
You kidding me? Playoffs?
What is up? It's the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name's Jeff Ratcliffe, and it's Friday, January 17th. Yeah, baby. Conference championship coming at us here, and we're back. After like a micro break, was out in Las Vegas for the FSGA conference, and wow, what a fun time that was. Not because it was Vegas, it's always just fun to be around other folks in the industry, and what a great industry it is, and just going to these things reaffirms it. But anyway, enough about that. Let's hit the ground running because we have a lot to talk about with these two games. We're going to give you the whole thing, the whole shebang here. Upgrades, downgrades, one and dones, player props, all of it. DFS is tricky this weekend. If you're not a heavy DFS player, I would opt towards the showdown, the single game slates, as opposed to doing the 2-game slate. Because hey, with the 2-game slate, yeah, sure, you could win a buttload of money. But if you're off by one player, I mean, that's really even the difference. Sometimes, you know, in a full slate, you could have a player off and still have a really solid lineup in cash. It's not going to happen this week. So you got to be spot on. Anyway, and there's, fewer players, so there's going to be overlap in lineups, etc. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun there, but my main DFS play is going to be on the single game slates this week. So let's start in order. Let's start with the Tennessee Titans and Kansas City Chiefs. And this game currently sitting with Kansas City giving 7, open at 7.5, so not much movement there. Did see a 1-point swing upward in the over-under, up to 53 now from 52. I still think the over's in play. But anyway, in terms of matchup upgrades in this one, lots of them. And really two polar opposite games, because in the other game we have a lot of downgrades. This one, upgrades galore. Last week, Tyreek Hill didn't get in on that scoring bonanza. And after I ended up watching the game back, didn't have the opportunity to do so earlier in the week because of travel out to Vegas, which I left on Monday. But I watched it back yesterday, finally. I was going through withdrawal on that, by the way. Watched it back, took notes, and whoa, the Houston Texans were shadowing. The Houston Texans were running they were running man coverage. It kind of looked like they were taking a page out of like what New England does or what Miami does, like the Belichick style. And in this one, Bradley Roby was shadowing Tyreek Hill, and Tyreek Hill was pretty quiet. Really, I mean, the receivers were quiet in that game. It was all Kelsey and Damian Williams. So they took advantage of that. But regardless, you can't keep a good man down. Yeah, 3 catches for 41 yards in a game where Kansas City put up over 50. That's surprising, but I like the matchup here. I don't expect any man coverage here against Hill. Last week we did see, I wouldn't call it a true shadow, but there were times where Adoree Jackson tracked Marquise Brown, but Marquise Brown pretty much played his side for almost the entire game. So I don't expect a shadow here. It would be surprising if that actually happened. And even if it did, I wouldn't be that worried about Tyreek Hill. I think he sees his share of Tremaine Brock in addition to Jackson in this one. And look out in that one. Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen Tremaine Brock get targeted 17 times. 17 freaking times! I like Tyreek Hill in this one. Of course, like Mahomes, as everybody does. But, I mean, you look at the two big performers from last week, Damian Williams, Travis Kelce. Both of them, they get great matchups yet again. They combined for 6 touchdowns last week. Titans aren't, they're not a home run of a matchup for running backs, but the 11th most fantasy points per game. I know I've said that the last 2 weeks, but still basing this on regular season data. 0.8 rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs in the regular season per game. It's pretty good there for Damian Williams. And then also, when you look at Kelce, in the regular season, only the Cardinals, Raiders, and Browns allowed more touchdowns to tight ends. So I think Kelce goes off. By the way, he's banged up. Not worried about him missing this contest. So don't sweat that one right there. Moving on to the other side, and there's matchups on the other side as well. Derrick Henry is freaking awesome. All time, in the last 2 weeks, he recorded the 16th and 10th best performances from a rushing yard standpoint in playoff history. That's pretty darn good. 30 carries plus in each of the last 3 weeks, 96 carries over that span. David Johnson, yes, I figured out a way to get a David Johnson reference in here. In the regular season, had 92 carries. Now, granted, he was hurt for a little bit there, but it just shows you it's a lot of freaking carries. Anyway, I know, I just wanted to get the David Johnson reference in there. So, Derrick Henry, just massive potential. 4.87 yards per carry allowed by the Chiefs to opposing running backs this season. Henry's going to go off again, very likely. The question from the Kansas City standpoint is, you're going to, the smart thing to do, I think, is to allow that. Bend but don't break. Give the yards up to Derrick Henry. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying don't just not try and stop the run, but, do your thing. He's going to touch the ball a lot, and if he rips off some runs, it's not a big deal. If you can stop the passing game, which we will likely not see a ton of, and you can do your thing on offense, then you're going to win. If Tennessee can stop their offense, if they can generate turnovers, they could win. I don't think this is just a slam dunk anymore. Tennessee, respect. All right, Titans fans, respect. I got you on this one. Respect. I don't think they win. It's not a slight at all at the Titans, though, because this is a good freaking football team. So we can't take that one lightly, for sure. Anyway, the other matchup that I like here is for Jonnu Smith. Hey, man, that was a pretty catch. This guy's going to be something for fantasy purposes. He's not quite something yet, but this week he is the clear number 3. I mean, Kelce and Kittle are way ahead of him, way ahead of pretty much everybody else. But Kansas City allowed third most receptions to tight ends in the regular season. So there's some appeal there with Jonnu Smith. The downgrade that I have in this one is A.J. Brown. And that's not good after what we've seen over the last 2 weeks. 2 freaking catches, and 4 targets in the playoffs. Guy was one of the hottest receivers in fantasy football down the stretch, and he has been Houdini, gone, disappeared from the playoffs. He's going to see a majority of his coverage. It's not going to be a shadow situation. Kansas City doesn't shadow. They did a few times during the year, but they don't shadow, really. Bashad Breeland, though, is who's going to see. And Breeland was pretty good this year. It used to be that we would say, go after that secondary. I don't think we can say that now. 45.5% catch rate from Breeland in the regular season. So it's another downgrade here for A.J. Brown. In terms of your one-and-dones in this matchup, one-and-done plays for me, I'm looking at... Really, if you have any Titans left, I'm going to use them. I don't have any Titans left. I did manage to get through in one of my one-and-dones with Derrick Henry, so I had him last week, but it kind of just kept pace with the people who played him in the first week of the playoffs. If you had him this week, obviously he's a slam dunk of a play, but it's highly unlikely that anybody out there managed to save him this long. Same thing with Brown. Probably don't have him. Might not have Tannehill, but I'm going to actually go on the other side of this slate this weekend and play on the NFC there. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So with this week, I mean, the best play would be Jonnu Smith out of the Titans. If you really don't think that Kansas City's going to win, then yeah, obviously play every Chief in this one. I don't think I can do that. But here's the thing. If I have, and it's tricky with tight end, if I have Jonnu Smith, let's say we have Jonnu Smith, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle left. In that instance, I'm not going to play Jonnu Smith. because here's what you risk if you play Jonnu Smith. If the Titans win and the 49ers lose, you're now playing Jimmy Graham in the Super Bowl. And the folks who didn't play Jonnu Smith, I would much rather have Jonnu Smith if it ends up being a Packers-Titans. I know that's the least likely outcome, but it is an outcome, and we can't say it's a 0%. So I don't want to go that route. For me, if I have Kelsey, Smith, and Kittle, I am playing Kittle, because that way I can guarantee that I have one of the guys in the Super Bowl. I'm either going to have Kelsey or Smith, and I like that better than having to go the Jimmy Graham route. So, again, is it likely the 49ers make it? Yes, but I don't want to risk that and go with Kittle this week. Okay, so that's how I'm approaching it. Now, let's say you did use Kelsey already. You used him last week, so that gives you Smith and Kittle left, and Jimmy Graham. I'm, in that instance, going to go with Smith. And the logic here is I want to put myself in the best position for next week as well, especially if I'm striking distance or if I'm, maybe in the lead, really, really close to the lead. I want to go with the highest percentage to have the stud in the Super Bowl. So I'm going with Kittle in the Super Bowl, because you look at the odds, they have a much greater chance of making the Super Bowl than the Titans do. So you got Kittle last week. All right, you got your points out of him. Play Smith this week. Save Kittle for next week. If it's you already used Kittle and you have Kelsey and Smith left, I'm going to go with Smith, because I think Kelsey gets through. And I, again, realize that in the two latter examples, you're not as good off as the first example, and there is the real chance that you could be using Jimmy Graham in the Super Bowl. So there you go. Anyway, in terms of player prop article went up at FanDuel. I tell you what, the playoffs have been tough. They have been really tough. I had a lot more success throughout the regular season than the playoffs so far. And part of it is when you're on a short game, there are some things that you just can't control. I mean, we had 2 overtime games in the first round of the playoffs. In overtime games, if you're somebody who takes a lot of unders like me, you're screwed. Like it just happens. So you can't really do anything there. And we did have, last week went relatively to chalk, with the one exception being the Baltimore-Tennessee game. And when it's an unpredictable game like that, then yeah, you're going to miss on some of your bets. It's just part of the process. We went 47% last week, so it's a little low. It's not disastrous, but we'll get back on. We're at 54% for the season, so that's exactly where we wanted to be. I wanted to be between 54 and 55%. So anyway, in this one, rolling down through, and the bets that I have here, the lines that we have, they're all from FanDuel's sportsbook. So, if you read the column, I divided up 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, based in order of priority. The 5-star are the best bets. So here's your 5 stars from this game. Patrick Mahomes passing touchdowns, 1.5. We're hammering the over. You don't get good odds on that one, but doesn't matter. We're hammering the over on that one. Mecole Hardman, 19.5 receiving yards. Like him to hit the over there. In terms of some 4 stars, well, actually only one 4-star from this game. Derrick Henry rushing and receiving yards, 123.5. FanDuel does give you that combined. I love that one. And I'm going to play this one here. It's not, he could certainly outrush that, but I think, basically we're actually a little bit light on him in terms of projections. I also run a personal model as well. My personal model is a little bit heavier, but all told, I still have him well under this combined, because he doesn't project to do much in the passing game. 3 stars for this one. Corey Davis, 38.5 receiving yards. Yes, please. Under. Way under. Damian Williams, receiving yards, 28.5. It's a tight one, but I'm going to go under there. Demarcus Robinson, though, 16.5 receiving yards. Let's take that over. Moving down to the 2 stars, and I mentioned the Derrick Henry rushing yards. Well, the line is just so massive that I'm going to play the under. 110.5. That is enormous. I can't remember recently seeing a line this high. I don't think there was a line that high in the regular season. That's a massive line. So I'm playing the under there. Rushing and receiving yards for Damian Williams, 85.5. Going to hit the under up on that one. That's a pretty good line, but we hit on the rushing and receiving yards on him last week, so we'll do it again this week. Your 1 stars, 62.5 receiving yards for A.J. Brown. It would seem like after the last 2 weeks that this would be a higher up bet. But the reason why I put it as a 1 star is because you just don't have any clue. Like, he could be that again, or he could absolutely explode here. Even in bad matchups, we've seen him explode. That's why I'm not staying away from him for DFS purposes. Patrick Mahomes rushing yards 18.5. I've had some success with quarterbacks hitting unders on those rushing yard props. Tyreek Hill 76.5 receiving yards. It's a pretty solid line, but he does come in slightly under in my model, so I'm going under. Jonnu Smith 2.5 catches. We're going over there. Tyreek Hill receptions under on 5.5. I think 5's the number for Tyreek Hill. And that's that for the player props for this contest. Moving over to the second game, and as I mentioned, there are a lot more poor matchups in this one. The only good, matchup upgrade that I could find really that stands out is for the 49ers backfield, and that complicates things, right? Ordinarily, if it was this time last week, I'd be like, hammer Raheem Mostert. But now, after last week's performance from Tevin Coleman, I think that it certainly is a little bit trickier. In DFS, I'm going to have exposure to both guys. Not in the same lineup, though. I'm not going to play them both in one lineup, but I am going to have exposure to both. However, I do prefer Raheem Mostert to Tevin Coleman. I think he's going to see more touches, and I'm basing this on a larger than just last week's sample size. It's a nice matchup for running backs, 4.86 yards per carry, 0.9 rushing scores per game to opposing running backs this season. So it's solid. I expect a lot on the ground in this one. In terms of the downgrades, there's a lot of downgrades, as you can imagine. But let's start with Davante Adams. So we're not going to see a shadow. Sherman's not going to shadow. Nobody's going to shadow. But the secondary is really good. There's no denying that. And yet, it's Davante Adams. And I know there's that widespread perception. We've talked about it on this show. We're going to keep it as our little secret, right? He was actually freaking amazing this year. It was just that he missed time with an injury. You can't do anything about that. But after coming back, he was fantastic. I mentioned this last week. Second among wideouts in PPR scoring from week 9 on. Double-digit targets in 9 of his last 10 games. Yeah. He's going to see volume here. He is very pricey in DFS, so you may want to look to fade him. But and by the way, if you're not going the Patrick Mahomes route, I think Aaron Rodgers he's not the cheapest. Jimmy G's really cheap on DK, so he is tempting as well. I'm going to build lineups with both of those guys and see which ones stand out. But I think it's worth the time to mess around a little bit and build some lineups with both a Jimmy G and probably a Kittle stack. I mean, your premium stack, then maybe do one with a Jimmy G and like a Debo stack. And then see what you can do from there. And sometimes that's the thought process, by the way. I think of, like, what is the core of this lineup? What story do I want to tell? And where do I start that story? And so, like, with that stack, it's, okay, they're surprising in this one because it's a relatively tough matchup, but Jimmy G exceeds expectations and Debo eats, right? Or the story of Aaron Rodgers. They go into San Francisco, and we know that he has ties to that particular part of the country from his college days. And they surprise the world, and Aaron Rodgers goes nuts because we know he has a high ceiling, and Davante Adams has another performance like last week. That's the start of the story, right? Your lineup has to tell a story. If it doesn't tell a coherent story, then how is it going to ultimately produce? So that's the starting spot. And then, you could add to that story. If you want to pay up at tight end, which now you're paying up for Adams, you could pay up for Kittle, but you're going to have to find other areas there. But you say it's somewhat of a shootout and Kittle goes nuts. There's the story, and it builds from there, right? That's the way I always try and think about it. Anyway, Aaron Jones also with the tough matchup, no doubt about it. But just like Davante Adams, can we truly count him out? No. He's expensive. He's not the most expensive on the slate. That's Derrick Henry. But he's certainly not Raheem Mostert cheap as well. I'm loading up on Mostert. I'm going to have a lot more exposure to him than I'm to Coleman in this one. Anyway, it's the red zone work that's so appealing with Aaron Jones. So even if he doesn't have an efficient yardage day, he could score 2 or 3 times, certainly. I mentioned Jimmy G. The Packers, they held Russell Wilson in check. It wasn't a complete erase him from the game performance, but they held him in check. It's a tough matchup. It's going to be a tough matchup for Jimmy G. It's going to be a tough matchup for Debo, Manny Sanders. They were kind of, somewhat quiet. And the most likely outcome in this one is 49ers defense holds the Packers offense in check. 49ers run game dominates and 49ers win. I mean, that's the most likely story. Is it the absolute yes that this is what is going to happen? No, it's football. We know that. We know that. But that would be what I would expect to see here. So one and dones. And by the way, Kittle, I'm not worried about the ankle injury, not worried about Allen Lazard either. I think they both play. One and dones. I'm loading up on the Packers. I'm playing the big three. And as I mentioned, I'm going to play Jonnu. This is a tricky week, though, because you're probably going to have to slum it a little bit and play a deep guy, or you're going to have to play somebody from one of the teams you think is going to get through. So just keep that in mind. I would save the big dogs if I could, Mahomes, etc., the big dogs for the Super Bowl, and maybe slum it. Like if I really had no options from the teams that I think are going to lose, and I really don't want to use like if Adam Humphries plays or something, I really don't want to use him. I don't have an issue with going and shooting from the moon with like a McCole Hardman or DeMarcus Robinson. Don't have an issue with that. In fact, I am going to probably have to do that in one of my one and done. So something to think about with that. All right, rolling through these player props here. 5 stars in this one. I have an under on Aaron Rodgers rushing yards at 12.5, and over on Kendrick Bourne's receiving yards 19.5. That number's nice and low. I like that one. An under on Aaron Rodgers passing touchdowns 2.5. Geronimo Allison over on 14.5 receiving yards. Kyle Juszczyk under on 13.5 receiving yards. Tevin Coleman only 38.5 rushing yards though. I am going to play an over there. And Allen Lazard 2.5 receptions. We're going up over that number right there. I'm taking another under on Aaron Rodgers. We have 2 lines for his passing touchdowns in this one. So I'm taking the under on 1.5 as well. Trying to double dip and hope he just throws for 1. Aaron Jones receptions 2.5, hammering an over. Raheem Mostert 10.5 receiving yards. Sneaky. We're going to play an under on that one. It's a tight line, but we are playing an under. Aaron Rodgers passing attempts 36.5. He comes in slightly under that one as well. So we'll hit that one up. Going down to the 1-star bets. Those were 2 stars right there. 1-star bets in this one. We have Jamal Williams under 20.5 rushing yards. Jimmy Graham over 23.5 receiving yards. And Manny Sanders over 3.5 receptions. So a lot of potential plays. I would not recommend making just these plays. Okay, I say that every week. Make your own plays, but that should get you started and certainly should show you the overall thought process for the week. So that's going to wrap it up. We will be back next week on Monday, like usual, to recap. We're going to start to transition a little bit into offseason, and offseason will mean some XFL talk as well. DraftKings is going to have XFL, so it's going to be a little bit bigger than AAF. But we won't go too overboard there. We have obviously bigger fish to fry with the draft coming up pretty soon, free agency, etc. So all of that transitioning next week. But Monday, like usual, we'll recap all of this action. By the way, shout out to the Rat Packer. I'm so rude. A Rat Packer spotted me in Vegas. There you go. A listener of the pod. If that is you, I'm so rude. I'm sorry I didn't ask for your name, but I really appreciate you saying hi. I appreciate all you guys. It was a really great year. And actually this week while we were out there, it was announced I'm up for 3 Fantasy Sports Writers Association awards and definitely could not be doing what I'm doing without the Rat Packers. So love you guys. Appreciate you. And enjoy this weekend. Also, go check out PFF.com. At Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. Catch you on the flip side for another edition of the pod. For PFF, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.